What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be taking a deep look at the muzzle attachments in Black Ops 6 to see which one is best, in particular for recoil control. And in this game, they've kept attachments pretty simple, and we've only got 4 muzzle attachments at the moment. And the first one I want to get out of the way real quick here is the Suppressor. Now, the Suppressor isn't like the others. All this does is it keeps you off the minimap when firing your gun. You don't show up as a red dot for enemy players, and there are no other effects whatsoever. People have been asking, are there any hidden downsides, like maybe a hidden range nerf? I tested that. Nope, there's no hidden range nerf. I tested to see if it maybe somehow had an impact on recoil control, and once again, there was no impact there. So the Suppressor does exactly what it says it's going to do, which is just keep you off the radar, and that's really all we have to say about that one. The rest of the video is going to be comparing the other 3 muzzle attachments and how they stack up against each other when it comes to recoil, since all of them have some sort of an effect on your recoil control. Generally, vertical recoil control. And before we get into our recoil comparisons, let's just go over the basics of what these do. So with the compensator, this one just helps with vertical recoil control and nothing else, although we do see the largest improvement to vertical recoil with this one. Then with the muzzle brake, this one mentions that it helps with your first shot recoil control, and it mentions it improves your kick reset speed, which I believe they're referring to center speed, or how quickly your gun returns to center after recoil is applied. And generally in Call of Duty, center speed can make a really big difference because it's constantly fighting against your recoil, trying to pull you back to center between every shot that you fire, even with a full auto, but even more so with slow fire rate full autos, where there's more time between shots for it to recenter. And then finally for our muzzles, with the ported compensator, this one also helps with that first shot recoil control. And then the second benefit here is it helps with vertical recoil control, but to a lesser degree than the compensator does. So there we go, that's the basic overview. Now let's get into the recoil tests, and I tested with a bunch of different weapons from different categories with different characteristics so you can see how these interact with various types of recoil and various types of weapons. And the first one I tested here is the XM4, since that's just kind of like the basic bare bones assault rifle. And as we can see here, as expected, the compensator is really squishing that recoil pattern down. It obviously isn't helping at all with horizontal recoil, and it can make the horizontal recoil look worse when you're looking at a recoil plot. And again, that's just because everything's squished down due to it helping quite a bit with vertical recoil control. Then with the muzzle brake, interestingly, there's not that much of an improvement here, aside from with those initial shots fired. That first shot recoil control is coming into play, but the kick reset speed doesn't really appear to be helping at all. And this just leaves us with the ported compensator, which as expected, we're not seeing quite as much of a vertical recoil control improvement compared to the standard compensator, but it's obviously still much better than the base. However, compared to the standard compensator, we do have a little bit better recoil with those initial few shots fired. And those are often the most important shots that you're going to be firing, because hopefully you shouldn't have to be taking too many shots to be getting a kill on an enemy player. And that's why overall, out of all of these for the XM4, I actually prefer the ported compensator if I want that little bit of extra vertical recoil control, which I would say isn't even necessary on the XM4. It's just if I'm absolutely trying to maximize my recoil potential, I'll definitely be putting that one on. As for the next assault rifle I tested here, this is the GPR91, and I tested this one because it has a lot of vertical recoil, but not a lot of horizontal, so naturally, the muzzle attachment should be very appealing on this. And once again, we see the same trend here. So the standard compensator is going to help the most with our total vertical recoil control. The muzzle brake, aside from those initial few shots fired, is not really helping at all with the GPR91, and the ported compensator is great for those initial shots fired, but not quite as good overall compared to the standard compensator. And finally for assault rifles, I wanted to test the Goblin Mark II, which is the semi-auto assault rifle, and the reason I picked this one is it has an interesting recoil pattern. It has a huge jump between the first and second shot fired, and then the recoil after that is very minimal. So I wanted to see how much of an improvement we see with that first shot recoil control on the muzzle brake and ported compensator, and we can see it actually helps a lot with that first shot jump, even more so than the standard compensator. And as a result, if I'm using this, the muzzle brake is not a bad choice, but I do think, once again, the ported compensator does beat out the muzzle brake because it's helping with the overall magnitude of vertical recoil as well as that first shot recoil. Then for SMGs, I just wanted to test the lowest fire rate SMG, which is the Tonto 22, mainly to see if that kick reset speed applies if you've got a low enough fire rate to it. And as we can see, the answer to that is no, it doesn't appear so. Our total magnitude of recoil with the muzzle brake is about the same compared to our base recoil, and again, it's just that first shot recoil that it's helping with. Aside from that, we see the same trend that we've been seeing throughout this video. And then for the other SMG I tested, I wanted to see what happens with the highest fire rate SMG. This is the Compact 92. And once again, no surprises, seems like everything's quite consistent here. We see the exact same trend despite the really high fire rate with this gun. Now, we've just got a couple more tests to go through. I wanted to see what happens with a burst weapon, since that is quite important, because they behave nothing like full auto weapons when it comes to recoil. Since it's typically about the recoil within each burst, and then they typically will recenter between every burst that you fire. So I use the Swap 556 for this next test. And we can see a notable recoil improvement with all of these muzzles. Not that it's really necessary since there's very minimal recoil with this, but if you're trying to make it pinpoint accurate, it's important to note that it appears your muzzle brake and ported compensator are going to be the better bet for burst weapons, and that makes sense. That first shot recoil control stat actually resets after every burst that you fire because there's enough time between those bursts. And since you're only firing 3 shots per burst, and therefore you only have to worry about the recoil applying twice, having one of those 2 recoil jumps significantly reduced is going to have a very big impact on the recoil of that gun. And based on what I'm seeing here, it appears that first shot recoil control improvement seems to be a little bit better with the muzzle brake compared to the ported compensator. And as a result, for the first time with all these tests, I actually recommend the muzzle brake on the burst guns rather than the compensator or the ported compensator. Not that those ones are bad and won't improve the guns, it's just the muzzle brake appears to be the best for burst guns. Now, one final test here for a different style of weapon. I decided to go with the DM10, which is a semi-auto marksman rifle. And just like with the Goblin Mark II, there's a pretty big jump between the first and second shot fired. And therefore, once again, we get the best improvement between that first and second shot with either the muzzle brake or the ported compensator. Not that the standard compensator is bad in this area, it's just not quite as good between the first and second shot fired, which are the 2 most important shots fired with the DM10, since ideally you want to be getting a 2-shot kill with this. Overall, since it's also helping with our total vertical magnitude of recoil, I would recommend going ported compensator on the DM10 based on these results. And that wraps it up for the muzzle recoil comparisons I did. However, I wanted to dive just a little bit deeper into that muzzle brake to find out what's going on with that, because it doesn't appear to be helping as much as it really should be based on the pros that are listed in game. So I wanted to take a look at kick reset speed to see if it's actually working properly. But before we do that, just a reminder, if you guys haven't subscribed to the channel yet and you like this style of content, this is what I do around here, and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. But let's dive into this test using the DM10. On the left, we've got the base DM10, no attachments. On the right, we've got the muzzle brake, which is meant to help with that kick reset speed. And we're going to be focusing on how quickly the gun returns to center on the top of that wall, which I used as my initial point of aim when I fired. Because if this kick reset speed is working properly, it should be returning back to that point noticeably sooner on the right-hand side compared to the left-hand side. Especially when you also factor in the fact that it's helping with that first shot recoil, and therefore we're not even kicking up as high, so it's got a shorter distance to travel on the right-hand side to get back to center. And yet what we're seeing here is it looks like it returns back to that center line at the exact same time in both of these cases. So to me, initially at least, this really seems like it's bugged, but something interesting happened after you return to that point of aim, and that is, I noticed the gun actually overcompensates a little bit for this and comes a little bit below your initial point of aim when you fired. And this is where there's a key difference between the muzzle brake and not having the muzzle brake. It doesn't overcompensate nearly as much, and for precise slow-firing guns like the DM10, for instance, that would actually be very helpful in-game, and you won't really see that show up in any recoil plots at all, since this doesn't apply until after your gun has fully recentered. But it appears that could be what that kick reset speed is talking about, is it prevents your gun from overcompensating as much when your kick resets back to the point of origin. That's really the only improvement I could notice with the muzzle brake, so I believe that's what this actually does. Either that or it's just bugged and it should be improving center speed, and yet it is not improving your center speed. In either case, generally speaking, for the vast majority of guns, you're just going to want to go with either the compensator or the ported compensator, depending on how much initial recoil that gun has. If it's got a lot of initial recoil, I'd go ported compensator. If it's got fairly consistent recoil, including with those first shots, then that's where the standard compensator tends to be best. And that's where we're going to wrap it up for today's video. You might be wondering, what about horizontal recoil? Well, that's where the underbarrel grips come into play, and I do plan on making a video covering those as well. I just thought it would be a little too much to pack all of that into one single video. If you guys enjoyed this one, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.